The intro for my special guest today is pretty simple. Nobody has been faster than this man on a sailboat. He's the fastest man on Earth, and daylight is second. The record-breaking run was set aboard his yacht Sailrocket over a 500-metre course and has a mind-blowing average speed of 65.45 knots. A massive welcome to Paul Larsen. Thanks for coming on board today, Paul.
Yeah, happy to be here. Always happy to talk about fast things, so bring it on.
Now, look, I want to start off with, you and I grew up in a very close location. I'm from Vermont South, and you're either from Bayswater or Hillsville. I can't remember which one it's right.
Hillsville.
For some reason, Bayswater stands out, but that's only like 30k away from each other.
Yeah. No, it's not many sailors come from Hillsville, but it was we actually started sailing up in Bonnie Doon, and I have to explain to other people that that's really a place. And then some racers came up there on holiday and encouraged us to come down to Port Phillip Bay, and that's where the passion started.
Yeah, I mean, the eastern suburbs of Melbourne is probably at best 45 minutes to an hour from the bay. So not too many sailors come from the eastern suburbs of Melbourne, I would have thought. But for the fastest man in the world and a bloke who works for Ronstan, it's pretty unreal. So today's topics, we're going to go through some speed sailing, obviously, and the amazing boat. And we're going to get into some technical stuff there. We're obviously going to talk about the Sailrocket. We're going to talk about a bit about one of your adventures down to the Antarctic, wasn't it?
Yep.
Antarctic, and then we're going to do some big boat sailing, and you've sailed some amazing vessels, so there's a lot to talk about here. So let's get into it. The run, it must be mental going at 65.45 knots. Like, what does it feel like?
It was very intense because I hadn't had much experience at that speed. I mean, 50 knots had really become quite common. And I say that because the boats were designed to go that quick. And for a boat that was designed to go at 65 or 70 knots, it's like getting in a fast car and then going at highway speeds. And that's what 50 knots became like. And I just kept hitting that ceiling, and we couldn't get it over 53 knots. And something was happening in the water. This was our second boat, probably 7 different foils of radical different shapes, and they all hit this low 50 knot ceiling. And because we weren't limited by the righting moment of the boat, I could just take it out in up to, like a 25 knot wind has got nearly 50% more power than a 20 knot wind. It goes up by the square. So I could take this boat out in 35 knots of wind and just pile the power into it. It's like dropping 2 V8s under the bonnet and seeing if you can crack it 100 mile an hour, and it would hit 53 knots. And it was, so everyone's got to remember, the boat only really started to work. We only unlocked the secret with the foil, or what made it work in this instance, in the last 10 days of the whole program of 11 years. And that only involved I think it was 4 days of sailing. So every time I sat in it and a little bit more breeze and sheeted that wing on, the boat wasn't going half a knot quicker or a knot quicker. It was going 5 or 6 knots quicker. And you were just going into, territory that was just theory before this. And every time I'd look at the GPS at the end of the run, because I don't know how fast I'm going down the run. I only look at that after the run. I'm too busy. It only lasts for 15 seconds. So I'm too busy concentrating on making sure I'm staying off the shore and my trajectory is good and everything's behaving. So it was mind-blowing to me to all of a sudden sit there and go, I know this is really quick. I just don't know how quick. And when you're into the 60s, it's awesome. I mean, it's just awesome. But the boat is in its element, and it goes from being a boat where you can feel the weight of the boat, because it's effectively in this tug of war between the wind, the aerodynamic loads and the hydrodynamic loads, and the two are opposed and they're pulling against each other. And in the middle of that, there's this 270 kilogram carbon fiber structure. But as that tug of war really starts to ignite, as that apparent wind builds up, because my apparent wind speed is quite similar to boat speed. It ends up around 65 knots. So it's like sticking your head out the window of your car at 75 mile an hour or something. But the weight of the boat stays the same, but these loads get bigger. So the boat starts to feel lighter and lighter, and it starts to get yanked around more and more by this tug of war. And the wind is never steady. Even in a perfect place like Walvis Bay, there's always gusts. You're doing 2.5 times wind speed. So if you get a 4 or 5 knot gust, it's a rapid acceleration or deacceleration of 10 knots, and it's so that acceleration, that yanking around of the boat, you just feel you're in something that's just come alive, that it's kind of saying, this is what you created, boy. Like it's this is what I want more. Like. And you think you're going to do something to control it, but you're a passenger. So wide-eyed.
Are you in control?
Well, you got a little steering wheel. The whole cockpit, the whole size of that fuselage is designed around my dimensions, pretty much. So you get the smallest steering wheel you can get off an open wheel sports car, and you put that in there, and then you still got to have a few cleats on the side. So it's like a sports car that you still got to put basic dinghy sort of fit out in it, and still got to pull on a main sheet and a few tweakers in there. So with the first boat, the one pictured up behind me here, Sailrocket 1, that boat was fundamentally flawed in its stability over 40 knots, and the problem was all the weight was at the back of it. So at about 38 knots, it was like flying an arrow backwards. You can fly it backwards at low speed, but when you get to 38 knots, it just wants to spin around. And at first it would do it horizontally, and if I turned it a little bit quick, it would just spin into the beach, and there's nothing I could do to stop it. It would overpower the rudder, and it was gone. And we did that 4 or 5 times, where it just smashed the wing down, folded the beam up, and we made this steering system that enabled us to effectively fly the arrow backwards. And you do that by steering it within 1/10 of a degree at high speed. And if you steer it any quicker than that, that turn starts and you've lost it. I said it was like reversing a car at 60 mile an hour on ice. It was, if you keep it dead straight, it's okay, but if as soon as you lose it, it's gone. It's around. So when we built Sailrocket 2, well, everyone knows what happened with the first one. When it got to 52 knots, if it couldn't do it horizontally, it did it in the air and took off and flipped that way. And so it was an unstable boat. When we built the second boat, we made it had to be aerodynamically stable and hydrodynamically stable. So unlike normal yachts, it became more like an airplane, and all the weight went in the nose. And it was a stable boat. But just to be sure, the steering was still, we made it super accurate and super fine. So I actually put a steering box in there, which was a box used for activating a lathe. So I think it was about 37-1. So if I wanted to turn that boat a fraction of a degree, I had to spin the wheel quite a lot. And quite often, almost like a tractor, you put your finger in the spoke and you turn it like that. And so the good thing about that is at high speed, once I had it set right, I could let the wheel go and there was no force feedback, so the rudder wouldn't move around. So the whole idea with this boat, it was rocket by name and rocket by nature, in the sense that once you hit that button and launched it and sheeted in, you're a passenger, and that thing was going to go to where all its drive equals all its drag. And that was designed to be up around 65 to 68 knots. So, you set that rudder angle, and that rudder angle and that rudder load was the one bit of data that we wanted at the end of every run, and that told us exactly how well balanced the boat was during the run. So I think we wanted about 75 kilos of side load on that rudder at full speed. And if we got to the end of that run and it was more, then we'd swing the beam back a little bit and move where the wing was in relation to the foil. If it was less, then we'd do it accordingly. And so we wouldn't just go and do 10 runs in a row. We'd quite often do 2 or 3 runs till we think we'd seen what we needed to see that day. And then we'd go back and look at all the data and say, is it well configured? Now, go on.
How many runs were you doing? Because I spoke to Simon McKean the other day, a similar interview to what we're doing here. And he was telling me that they had such a small window purely because of tide, that you couldn't be, to have the record ratified, you couldn't have more than a knot of tide or something like that. So I'm guessing Namibia, the tide wasn't there as much if you were able to do multiple runs?
No, the tide wasn't as big a thing. It used to be hard to get across to the speed spot because the lagoon would shut off. But with this boat, little factors like you see the height of that the boat is held up above those floats that it sits on, gives it a little bit of off-road capability, and that means we can tow it through choppy seas and access the course more. So these are compromises made to make the boat practical for sailing in Namibia. But no, we could do runs all day if we wanted to. The tide wasn't so much an issue, but what happened in Namibia, there was never any wind in the morning. The wind would start to roll in about 11 o'clock and it would build up through the afternoon and then drop off. Usually by 10 o'clock to 12 o'clock at night, it was back to glassy again. And it would turn on like a machine all the time like that. So it's one of those places when it's blowing, you think it's never going to stop. And then, unfortunately on that last time we were there, there was not much wind that year and we had to make the most of every day we had. Don't know how many runs we did on that boat in total. Wouldn't have been much, you do, I don't know, maybe say you do 50 runs on that boat from when it was built, maybe more, say you do 60 runs, but the runs only take 15 or 20 seconds and stuff,
it's not much sailing.
Yeah, it's not a lot of sailing. You got to make the most. You got to get as much data as you can out of those runs, and it's good. But Walvis Bay was an incredible location, and we couldn't afford not to be there.
Yeah, it's quite a science, and I've got a few more questions coming back to that. But I think we'll jump in and have a look at the run. I see. I'll get my screen shared up here. So, all right. So you've just let go of the mooring line.
Yeah, I've let go of the bow line, but I'm still tethered to the rib by the back of the boat. So So I'm hanging and dragging the boat along there now, and I'm stalling the wing. It's like pulling your traveller hard up to windward because I'm trying to get the boat to sit 90 degrees to the wind. The boat's not stable at low speed. It just wants to sit at its 65 knot configuration, and the hardest part of this boat is getting it started. So I've released the rope there, and what you see here is the wing's fully stalled. It's not and you can see it just driving the wing underwater there. And I thought, I've blown it. Look, the whole leeward side goes underwater. I think you actually see a little bit of ventilation on the underside. This is lightweight skins and stuff. It's not what you want to be doing to your wing. And I thought I'd blown it. I thought I heard something pop. Malcolm's waiting up the course, watching me launch there. This is the first time Malcolm in 11 years had seen the boat go over 40 knots. So I've released the string, and I'm still thinking.
And there you are on the wheel.
Yep. I'm thinking something's broken, and I'm looking over at the wing, thinking, should I go? Should I not go? And in my head, I'm doing a lot of quick things, thinking we won't get another run today. Interesting watching the flow off the main foil change from ventilated to attached flow here. You really see the spray pattern change. Here she comes.
This is the bit I love here. That with a slingshot in is amazing.
That kick there is where it changes from ventilated to attached flow. And just after that, we hit the peak speed of the run, which is 68.33 knots, which is just under 80 mile an hour. And see the beam flying, how high the beam's flying out there? That's the end of the run. It was actually creating that much apparent that it was generating that much lift, and I was out of my control range to slow that. So I stopped the run because the boat was actually rolling into windward. So we could configure it to go faster after another run because that's the first time we'd ever gone that quick. But the job was done, and that was the last time she had to sail. So it's and she still sits in the container exactly in that configuration now. Yeah, but it was I suppose. Yeah, here's the kick. Boom.
Yeah.
She just
that's when the run starts, when that kick happens. Is that when you've crossed the line?
Well, we got the same GPS system that was ratified, by the Yellow Pages guys, by Simon and the boys down there with the big Trimbles. So we can pick the best 500 meters out of that run. But it pretty much started after that kick. Yeah. You can see there's a rudder dragging in the water out the back there. That rudder is meant to be kicked up, and that shook down. The wing isn't fully sheeted together, isn't fully closed off because the loads in the thin main sheets is causing stretch. This guy filmed it for the first time we ever saw it from the air. They were down there filming Mad Max at the same time. So this drone pilot gave us a hand here. But I love that shot because when we designed this boat, we were saying that's going to put out a rooster tail like 60 foot out the back, and you can see the rainbow in it. It's just that was the icing on the cake, seeing that shot. We did 3 runs that day, back to back. The wind was building. We knew it was going to be out of our range, like get over 30 knots. And there's, I love watching that every time. But it's
so it says 65.37 there.
Yeah. Well, what happens is the GPS, the big Trimble system, you have to post-process that data. It's just a big yellow box. So the only thing I have reading the data is actually under that lid that I'm carrying there. It's a little, it's just a little Trimble GPS, and you set it for, I think it's an 18-second average, and you get your best 18-second average. And so that 18-second average was 65.37, but we know the actual number will be higher because we only need 14 seconds. So we can take the best 14 seconds of that 18 seconds. And that's why there's the difference between what I saw. And I didn't look at that number until we got back to the beach. So I said to everyone, I think that's the money run. And I didn't know how high it was. What's really cool about the GPS was that it's got 2 settings, and it scrolls between the 2 settings. And one is your peak speed, and the other one is your 18-second average. So when I first looked at it, I saw 65.37, and I thought that's the new best peak speed. I wonder what the average is going to be. And everyone's waiting for me to read it out. And then the next number came out on that GPS at 67 point whatever it was. And I looked at it, and it took me a while to compute. I mean, to do a 5 or 6 knot jump in speed in one run for an outright record is just mind-blowing. And it was just too perfect, and all, like, everything just sort of rushed into your head as what that meant. I just sat there whilst this number was scrolling around to make sure, and everyone's waiting, and and then I thought, all right, I saw you sort of see me shake my head and actually have to write it down. And yeah, it was a magic moment, and especially magic because from the minute we envisaged that boat, when I sat down there with a small design team and laid down the parameters for boat number 2, the target was 65 knots, and whenever the velocity prediction programs showed a number below that, then I'd say, all right, well, we've got to build a bigger wing, or we've got to do something. We've got to get up above 65. That number does not slip. So it was, gives me an immense amount of pride to call up some of the, brilliant members of our teams, Chris Hornsey-Jones, who's really the main designer of Sailrocket 2, and let him and say, you're not going to believe this, but we just did 65 knots. It's pretty special.
Yeah. So on to the next question is, you talked a bit about ratifying the speed. Now, Simon McKeon chatted to me about it. Back in the day, they had like a camera, and almost the cameras needed to be in sync. And there was a lot of times that they had a really good run, but the cameras weren't in sync. But you were much later, in time, and technology had increased. So GPS had come on board. So did you have to have an official there and all that sort of stuff? Like, how does it work?
Yeah, absolutely. You got to you book a 28-day window with the World Speed Sailing Record Council, and you have to fly someone down and put them up and look after them. And they're just an observer. They see how your GPS is mounted in your boat. They make sure that you put the SD card in there, and they're there at the end to see the GPS card come out. So you can't put it in the rib or anything like that. And they check the tide, which they do by pretty basic means, but that, you know, that suits us. It's just pretty much, he puts an orange in the water that's pretty much neutrally buoyant and just times the drift up and down the course. And yeah, that's about it. So look, we had the same guy, Michael Ellison, who's done a lot of these events over the years. We had him for the first, I don't know, 3 or 4 record attempts down there, and we got to know him quite well. But he was booked out down in Luderitz, because whilst we were doing this record attempt, the kite surfers, which all held the record, were down in a few hundred kilometres south in Luderitz, waiting for their 50-knot day. And he was down there ratifying them. So we got another fellow from the WSSRC to come along. I kind of like the fact that Michael was happy not to be there for the record, because he thought, you know, he's starting to not get so objective. He's starting to hope we get the record, you know, like, because he's seen the work and the crashes and I suppose the passion and effort that's gone into it. So to have someone there who was objective, that was good. And I love the fact that he was down there amongst the kiters when they got the news that we'd done it. So I'd love to have his perspective. And we had a good friend who I still sail with a lot, who was there in the office at Hydropter as well when they were all watching it and got the news. So I like having that perspective. As I sat there and watched these guys get the records and keep knocking it out of my range for so many years. So yeah.
Do you think it's going to get beaten?
Oh yeah. I'm getting to the stage now where I'm really hoping someone comes and rattles the cage. It is like you're precious, you know, like you do love living with it. I'm perfectly happy not to go out and bang the drum about us having the record. I'm happy to sit here quietly in Weymouth and just know that that's something you've got, and not aggravate or motivate the competition. But on the other hand, it would be, I was looking back, I was so happy that during that time that we were going for it, especially with Sailrocket 1 and certainly with Sailrocket 2, but that there was the Macquarie Innovation guys were doing it. Hydropter was doing it. The windsurfers were getting quick, you know, had broken yellow pages after 11 years or something. And the kite surfers were coming in and then knocking it out of the physical range of, you know, conventional foiling and stuff. So it was a really hot time. And that competition, you got to be thankful for great competition, because when you look back, it's what defines your own performance. And it's so seeing other teams and their solutions is going to make it fascinating. And, you know, our boat, that boat's not done by any stretch. I mean, we only just got it working for a few days and proved it right and did what we did, which I was perfectly happy to leave it at that point, perfectly happy to get out of it with my neck still intact and park it up. But yeah, I think now we're ready for someone to come and have a go at it. So, and there's right now there's a team out there. I think Benoit and his boys with that SP80 project are up there having playing around with their first prototypes in Switzerland. And is
that the glider looking thing with the kite?
Yeah, with the kite and stuff. It's very similar to what Richard Jenkins did back in the early 2000s and stuff. He's now doing all the sail drones and stuff. It's, I mean, in theory, the perfect sailing boat, considering you're pretty much using the forces of wind against the forces of water, is virtually a sailplane with a tether to a hydroplane in the water, and just let those two go. And that's the perfect and the fastest thing. But how you actually practically make that do work remains to be seen. So I guess those guys are coming from fundamentally they're coming from a kiting background with Benoit Gaudio driving the program. To me, the problem isn't so much the boat and everything; it's getting the performance out of the kite. That's their limiting factor, because our wings are a very efficient wing, and it's very powerful, and it allows us to work at the boat speed to wind speed ratios we do up in that high speed range. I suppose in some aspects there's a lot of structure, there's a lot of stuff between our wing and our hydrofoil. But even that is quite an elegant solution. Like I say, it's only 270 kilos and very aerodynamically clean. But they're trying to reduce all that and get as much out of the water as they can. There's actually a lot of information. If you look at that video that we were looking at before, if anyone cares to go back and look at that frame by frame, it's called the anniversary edit, and every shot in there is in there for a reason, and it's all done exactly as the timeline plays out. And some of those shots from the rig looking down at the boat, if ever you drive a rib or anything, even windsurfer, if you go in a little bit of chop, it always seems to go faster than it does in dead flat water. It sort of aerates a bit. And even our boat was a bit like that. And you look at that front float and how little that's in contact with the water. There's tricks to how we configure the boat to make it do that. A lot of information in that video, but yeah, the boat was working very well. Still,
I must admit, I've watched both the Yellow Pages runs and your run, and I'm very impressed at how much chop it can handle compared to what Yellow Pages needed. Nothing. They needed glass water.
They did. I mean, Yellow Pages remains probably one of the most efficient speed sailing boats ever. I mean, it was a beautiful boat to watch, and certainly a huge amount of inspiration for me. As you mentioned, we grew up in Victoria. I was down there at Macrae watching the C-class catamarans and Victoria 150 and later on the Edge. And I knew Simon from his NACRA days, and then when he took the helm of the Edge. So, I was always inspired by that in Yellow Pages. And that's really, I just dreamed of one day growing up and joining those ranks and having a shot at that. But when we got to Namibia, once again, there's so many practical compromises, but people won't get to appreciate how, I guess, clever Sailrocket 2 was for doing the job it had to do. Even when in that picture behind you there, you can see the grey bit on the beam, and that's the one accident we had. We thought we could, with this boat, the idea was there's a little tether hanging off the nose of the boat there right at the front. And the vision was we get to an end of a run, you just hook a rib onto it and you just tow it straight back up the course at 20 knots and the whole wing back winds and just feathers, and you tow it up and let it go again and you do another run back to back. The one time we tried that, the wing didn't feather, and that beam, that strut coming from the wing just folded the beam in half and the wing came crashing down. So, you're out there in 25 knots of wind and chop and your wings dragging in the water and you're a bit off the beach and you've got to tow it to shore. But because I'd done that numerous times before, every bit of articulation, all the ball joints and connections and everything were designed to articulate through these extreme ranges, not just their operating range, because it's quite often the secondary breakages that cause the big breakages when you're trying to recover the damage. And we got that thing back to shore and not one other thing was broken. So we just had to fix that beam up overnight and we're good to go the next day. And all those little things were incorporated in this boat. So I guess when I look at a lot of designs and concepts, I sit there and go, all right, I can understand what you're trying to achieve in your steady state, but all these little things, if you have a breakage like that and you've got 3 windy days left in the record attempt until your money runs out, your WSSRC commissioner is booked to fly home and so on, and you've done a breakage which takes a week to fix, you're over, you're out, people will say your boat that boat was never that quick. And the boat might have been quick, but you never gave it the opportunity to shine. So these are all prototypes, and you got to give them as much chance as possible to survive through these development phases, because this should be a simple boat. I mean, I sail one direction down a course at a fixed angle and a fixed wind speed. Should be simple, right? But life's not like that. So and you get humbled pretty quickly in even a simple game like this. And it sure makes me appreciate, because at the same time as this, the AC 72s were really starting to hit their straps, foiling over in San Fran and stuff. And I could, although we were, we just knocked the ball out the park speed-wise, I could appreciate that they were getting these things around the course, and it was a fantastic time for sailing. It was great to be in there amongst it. I didn't have to sit there and feel jealous of them because we just had our own toy to play with.
So talk to me about the location, Namibia. Like, did you ever think of possibly going down to Sandy Point and having a crack down there because it had been a speed location and been successful? Like, why Namibia?
I had been to Sandy Point. We'd gone down there with a Hobie Cat in about 40 knots, which was memorable. But it was, and I'd been down and I'd seen Yellow Page or Macquarie Innovation sitting on the bank down there. No, well, right now I'm sitting in Weymouth. This is historically the home of speed sailing. We came down here and was hoping to do it here, but as the speeds go up, you start to this course becomes shorter and more crowded, and it wasn't as reliable as we thought it would be. When it says it's going to be 20 knots, it could be 15 knots with 35 knot squalls coming through all day, and we were just going broke here. I mean, we'd launched Sailrocket 1, and you try and get people to come and help you. You try and get media down or sponsors to come and watch you run, and you quickly learn they'll come down. Mondays looks good, come down Monday, sit around in Weymouth. Tuesday might be all right, neither day's any good. Everyone goes home Wednesday, say they'll come back Thursday, no one comes back Thursday, and all of a sudden Friday turns out to be all right, and you just grab a random guy off a windsurfer to drive a rib and another mate to hold a camera in a wobbly camera. And, it's Helena and I trying to manage a boat on it. And it was just hopeless. And we were just going backwards, and we couldn't get the runs and the footage and the momentum going in the project. So every time you compensate with your own effort, your own, you go away and work and you get your own cash and you pour that back into it, and we sit there, and then you've got to turn work down to be on standby. And I was literally just sitting here going broke, and you're turning away big gigs, around the world record attempts and stuff like that, because now this is your project, this is your baby, and you got to be the one to sit home and wipe its backside and feed it. So this is something you know all about now. So I was sitting here, and at this same time, things like Google Earth are really starting to kick in, and the amount of content on the internet's kicking in. When they have Weymouth Speed Week every year, some big hitters had come here like Bjorn Dunkerbeck, and then halfway through Weymouth Speed Week, they'd go down to this place, Walvis Bay in Namibia. Didn't even really know where Namibia was, somewhere in Africa. But also who went down there was this record commissioner I was talking about, Michael Allison. And the good thing about Michael Allison is he'd been to all the places. He'd seen all the, the trench in the Camargue, the French Trench, and then Sandy Point, and places in Mexico. And I'd sit there and ask him, what do you reckon about this and that? And what do you reckon about these places? And he said he thought Walvis Bay would be good for me because it was too square for the kite surfers and windsurfers who like stronger winds downwind. So sitting here dead broke, and I had a credit card, which I rarely, if ever, use. It had, I think it had like 1,500 quid on it. And I was Googling all these places and looking at the historical data, and I saw Walvis Bay, and I kept looking at it, and I'm thinking, that looks like it's perfect. And I called up a chap down there running a kite surfing place, Jürgen Geiger, and he said, if you get down here, because he organises the speed event down there, you can stay at my place and I'll drop you off over there. So I literally racked up this credit card and went down and landed 400 Ks inland, a place that kind of looks like Windhoek's, kind of a bit like Townsville or somewhere like that, and probably of a similar size, and jumped in there and caught a bus 400 Ks into Walvis Bay, and got dropped off on a rib the next day over on this remote speed strip beach out in the middle of the lagoon there, and all the flamingos and everything. It was all kind of new and exotic, and just watch this weather build up to this speed and just lock into this perfect angle. And I thought, this is heaven. This is like you're trying to see how fast your car will go out down the main street of your hometown at 2 a.m, and then you go to Bonneville's salt flats and you just go, oh my God, we wasted. Let's just get here. So all of a sudden, once I'd seen that spot, we'd built the wing for the first boat, and I thought, we just got to get here. We got to get here. And I was just super motivated and fueled by what I'd seen, and went back, and any shyness or caution to approach people, or being worried that I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do with the money they give me, all of a sudden there was a definite target, and that I went back, and I think it was within less than a month from me standing on that beach, Sailrocket 1 was rigged sitting on that beach. So we'd come back, loaded it into a container, got the funding we needed, shipped the whole thing down, set ourselves up, configured it from port to starboard tack, which favoured this course. First boat, we could make a mirror image of itself because we didn't know where we were going to sail it. And we went down that course, and within 15 seconds, I'd had my first massive wipeout. So, because we went faster than we'd ever been before. Imagine you build a surfboard, a big wave gun board, but you've never surfed big waves before, and you're just surfing on chop in Port Phillip Bay, and you sit there and you build it. Then all of a sudden you fly to Hawaii and go out and paddle onto your first 15-foot wave and realize that you don't really know how to surf. You haven't cracked this yet. And that was us. We went faster than we'd ever gone before, and went straight up to the stability limits of that boat at 38 knots and spun out and smashed it down. And it was and then the learning started. So that was Walvis Bay.
Let's talk about the boat, the design. So, because she's I don't know about an ugly duckling, but it's an odd looking boat that you just go, wow, that thing sails. Like it's got a beauty in one hand and a strangeness in another. It's just, I'm looking at it now in the background behind me, and it just goes, wow, it's just so exotic. And the wing on an angle, and the big foil going out the side, and the pods look like they're off the wrong way. Like, talk to me about it. Like, how does it work?
They are. It's not a pretty boat, and it's not the boat. We didn't start off saying it's going to look like this. It's actually a hybrid of a number of concepts laid down by the parameters that we set for it. I mentioned earlier, at the target was it had to do 65 knots in 26 knots of wind. We'd spent a lot of time down there with the first boat, so we knew the place very well. 26 knots of wind means gusting 30 knots, and 26 knots is a common wind range that will allow us to get lots of runs in down at Walvis Bay. If we made it for 30 knots, the days would be less frequent and so on. So, and it had to be aerodynamically stable and hydrodynamically stable. So we always focused hard on the maths behind these boats. The maths had to be right. We weren't wishful thinkers. We didn't just hope to work it out when we got there. The numbers had to show where we were at any point. If ever we got lost, or we lost, we got humbled by crashes or wipeouts, or we couldn't unlock the performance, we didn't want to sit there and just say, I think this will be what's right. We have to look at the maths. And if we can't fault the maths, then we know to keep going back into that laboratory till we unlock the maths. So a velocity prediction program built by Chris at Aerotrope and Malcolm Barnsley, who designed Sailrocket 1, was behind this whole boat. But your top speed is when all your thrust equals all your drag. So, there's two ways of going faster. You can add more power, or you can reduce the drag. And I guess that this is a combination of both these things. The boat it's designed to be dynamically stable at high speed. And that means I don't have to if a gust or anything hits it, it will react like a well-balanced paper aeroplane, and it'll seek stability. Because it's pretty difficult if you've got control issues or you're always fighting that. Your cockpit workload gets very high. It makes life a lot easier if you're working with a stable craft and not an unstable craft. I think that was one thing they had to work with quite a bit on Yellow Pages. You know, they needed 2 people, for example. This boat, there is a second seat in the back. We didn't know if we were going to need 2 people or not, but it turned out to be so locked in and stable that we didn't need that. We knew that we'd done all the measurements on the beach to measure the amount of wind shear, the wind speed down close to the ground, all the way up to the height of the rig. So we knew how much the wind changed in speed and direction, which was almost exactly the same as is written in engineering books, like building codes, for example, have those numbers, and everything we saw there was validated by that. But so that whole boat is designed, is twisted as it goes up to match that wind shear and wind gradient. It's got the actual fuselage at high speed, when it's going at the correct boat speed to wind speed ratio, the fuselage is actually pointing directly into the wind. So you're right when you say those floats look like they're skewed off. They're actually skewed off 20 degrees. So there's a little wind vane just in front of the cockpit there, like a yaw string on a glider. And as I'm going really quick, that should be pointing directly down the fuselage. So it's one of the very few boats that, as it goes faster and faster, the aerodynamic drag drops, because that wind goes more in line with the fuselage until it's going 2.5 times wind speed, in which case the apparent wind is directly blowing down that fuselage. And even the floats, the cross-sectional flow of the floats, because the floats will be at 20 degrees when it's at full speed. And that's why they're kind of a flattened shape. And they're designed to be as aerodynamically clean in those angles as well. The fairing on the beam, on the strut that holds up the wing there, that float, that's mass balanced and aerodynamically balanced. So as the wind changes, that feathers as well. We tried to make it as aerodynamically. Reducing drag is a big thing. Sailing boats are very unique in the fact that the faster they go, the more power they generate for themselves. And we all know that depth zone of high apparent wind speed build-up at around 90 degrees, where the faster you go, the more wind you get, you quickly get overpowered. And all of a sudden your get out is equidistant from going up and high to get out of it, to feather the boat, or bearing away to unload it. This boat is designed to live 100% in that zone. It's designed to build up the apparent wind as much as possible, because it doesn't have any overturning forces. The force, the vector driving through the middle of that wing is pointing directly at the foil on the other side. So there's no overturning forces. The only thing that's really lifting up that float and everything out to the leeward side there is that little winglet that goes out the side there, and that's operating in ground effect. I think it's about 2.1 square meters. You can probably see a little flap just hanging down off the back of it there. So the beauty of that wing design is we want to get the center of effort as low as we can. We want to get the wing as upright as we can. If the wing was going to be perfectly upright, that beam would have to be infinitely long. If we want to make the beam shorter, then the wing has to tilt over more to point that vector through the foil. If there was no beam, the wing and foil would be horizontal, for example. 30 degrees is the mathematical tipping point where you get most of the drive. You still get 80% or 80-something% of the drive for a slight loss of vertical. There's vertical losses to get that alignment. It's where kites work really well, because the beam is very cheap on a kite. It's string. You can, when you look at those hydrofoiling kite surfers, the lower wingtip is virtually dragging in the water. They're trying to get the kite as vertical as possible, and that's why they're incredibly efficient. But there comes a time when string drag starts to kick in. So the mathematics sort of define the shape of that boat. We want that 30-degree inclination. if I go higher aspect ratio, that vector goes up and the wing has to be inclined more. So in order to get aspect ratio, we put the wing out to leeward. So the wing thinks it's a long, skinny wing. It sort of doesn't know it has that bend in it that much. And also we reduce tip losses by having it close to the water. So very clever design. I knew that was going to be a complex thing to build. I was worried about that hitting waves and about how we repair it if we have a crash out there. And so in order for that to make it into the cut for the design, Chris had to run that through the velocity prediction program and put a number to it. And he said that number, that gives us 5 knots at 26 knots of wind. And so it's like, it's in. That's we have to design and build it. That makes the cut, and that's worth the design, the tooling, the complexities and everything of it. So everything had to be quantified to qualify into the design of this thing. So
there's got to be like you watch it come into. We watched the run before, and you're coming into the run, and you're saying that you're offset. To actually get the boat, I mean, all these things that you're saying with numbers and this is the perfect thing, but to get it to that perfect speed to actually do that pace, it's got to be hard. Like, we saw the wing submarining, and, you don't want to have that pontoon too buoyant and too big because then it's too much drag and stuff like that. So,
yeah,
it's so much giveaway to gain stuff. It's got to be hard to work out. Yeah, exactly. If it's going to be good or not.
That's the skill of the project. Once that thing's on the course, you can plug anyone into that boat, and I'm just a lump in the front in a way. But it's the hard bits getting through the whole design phase and getting the thing up and started and onto and going. That's the real tricky part of this, because the lower part of that wing is fixed to the boat. You can actually see the split just above the beam there. I'm only sheeting the bit of the wing up above that. So at low speed, the whole wing isn't being used. It's like you can only sheet from your second batten up sort of thing, so that you don't get you lose a lot of efficiency. So the only way I can get that wing to work, the hard bit's getting it up to probably about 15 knots. Once it's 15 knots, it's up and planing and everything starts to drop into, it's over its big hump and it starts to accelerate. So I've got to be taken a fair way off the beach. And when they let the line go, I've got to start accelerating, and the boat just starts weathercocking because the rudder's tiny. You only need a tiny rudder. Even the rudder's probably 3 times bigger than it needs to be. It's 65 knots, but it has to be big enough to give you control at low speed. And so you're sitting there spinning the wheel madly in the cockpit and trying to sheet this thing and ooch it to get over that hump. And the boat's rounding up, and there comes a point in that round up where you can just sheet the wing in and everything lines up. And if you get it a bit wrong, it just goes head to wind and the boat parks, and that's it. You're not going to get it out of there. So, and then the rib has to come alongside, you drift down the course, you take it into the beach, you take all the fairings off, you put all the struts on, you lower the wing, you take it back up, and it could be an hour-long process. So,
yeah, it's amazing that it's designed to obviously make the optimum speed, but it's got to be designed and engineered to get there in the first place. And I think that's a lot to do with the record in itself, because it doesn't look easy just to get that boat to do that slingshot down that course. That's for sure.
It's diabolical. As I said earlier, three runs we did that day, and we knew the day was going to build up and get to over 30 knots where it was going to be too hard for us to sail it. Interestingly, you get bloody minded as the record starts to get threatened. And I think we all did this a couple of years before this with the Macquarie Innovations, Hydropter and Kite Surfers. There was one time when I think all four teams were actually on site chasing 50 knots and the record at the same time. And we knew if our container was shaking, if it was that windy, we knew 400 Ks or whatever it is down south in Lutteridge, the kite surfers were having a big day. And, we watched Seb Catalan and then the other guys go and break 50 knots the first time as we sat there in our shaking container, and we Hydropter even before that, Hydropter was the first boat to break Yellow Pages record. I think they still hadn't quite got the outright record. I think by that time the Antoine Elbu might have had it on the windsurfer. But
yeah,
finally, after so many years, finally Yellow Pages has been unseated, and to see Hydropter do it. And I always believe we were quicker than Hydropter, or should be able to beat them. So they were going to the Paris Boat Show that day, the first day, and Hydropter had sort of jumped on the scene as a serious speed sailing boat for the first time. And we went out and did our first record attempt, and we beat them, and we became the fastest boat. And then 50 minutes later did the somersault. But we had the record and survived. So we were all pushing to the limits. And then Hydropter came out, because then they probably thought we were going to get 50 knots, or they knew that we were now on the turf. And they came out and they absolutely went hell for leather for it, and had their massive wipeout and chucked 11 people in the water, and had a huge crash. And then Macquarie Innovation finally, after setting their record in 93, finally got their act together, and they went out above their normal speed range. So they stopped, sailing in what they thought was their normal safe 18 to 20 knot range. And I think they ended up doing it in something like 24 knots, because the pressure was on, the competition was breathing down their neck, and they went out and became the first boat to get through 50, which quietly I was pretty happy for them, because I thought, good on you, that's been a big team, inspirational team doing it for a long time. So I was glad they got that one. But we were all absolutely going for it, and pushing above our ranges.
So you mentioned the crash. Now that leads me into my next couple of questions of being aero drag and hydro drag. So an F1 car is like an upside down aeroplane, and that thing looks like it's about to take off at the speeds it's doing. Are we talking about asymmetric foil being upside down to try and almost keep it in the water? Because, I mean, it's basically a wing flying along there. How do you not get it to do what?
We're more airborne than waterborne. There's no doubt about it. It's in, where is it? I've probably got it here. Here it is right here, funnily enough. This is the Bible. That's Bernard Smith's book there, the 40 knot sailing boat. That's the book that started all this. And he talks about being air people, where instead of being in the water and reaching up and catching the air, that you're in the air and you're reaching down and grabbing a handful of water. And Sailrocket 2 is certainly along that ilk, in the sign that in the aspect that the wing is trying to pull you into the air. And if that foil breaks, you don't fall down into the water. You're off, you're into the air, you become airborne. So every other craft you're sort of looking at now is sort of being lifted out of the water. This one's being held down to the water. And that's a key difference. And that's an important aspect. I mean, you've got the ground effect of the beam and the outer wing and everything there is holding it down. So, and the front float is, as shown in that video, in that slow motion section from the top of the thing, you see that lightly skipping on the water. If I swing the beam forward a bit more and put more load on the rudder, say I've got, at speed, I've got 40 kilos of static weight on that front float, forcing it to skip. If I swing that beam further forward and put more load on the rudder is vertical. There's no inclination to it, so it can't pull down. It can only act laterally. If I put more load on that, you're unloading the main foil, and the front of the boat starts to float a bit more. So the more I load up, that we sit there and go 40 kilos, or I think it's 70 kilos is about safe, what we think is a safe margin, but we can make it so the whole front of the boat actually floats as well. And you're really just balancing this knife edge of aerodynamic stability, reducing drag. And these are all the tweaks that still exist in that boat that we haven't really played with. I mean, you look at it, it's got big old GoPros hanging all over it, and struts and stuff, and my helmet's sticking up in the air there. It's there's a bit to come if you wanted to. Like, there's no cockpit, which obviously could reduce a bit of drag there. And like you said, there's GoPros hanging out everywhere, and all these things add up. So
there's more in the tank, that's for sure.
Well, like I say, you go along in your car at 120 kilometers an hour, and you put 5 GoPros on a stick and stick it out the window, and that's just pure drag. That's just holding you back. Obviously, we need it. That's why it brought all these great images and stuff, and I wouldn't change it for a bit. But the cockpit, that safety, you got no idea which way these things are going to crash, and it could take off into the air. Each different component failure could lead to a massively different crash, and it's much safer crashing on land at that speed than it is on water, because if I'm going along at a 20-degree angle down that course, if it for any reason nose dives or fouls or anything and rolls in, I don't even go in straight ahead. I go into a super rapid roll. Like if that beam pin fails for any reason, or the beams stay, we have crazy things happen, like seals jump up on the course, or every now and then you get dolphins herding fish into the beach, and if anything freaks out at this thing coming down the course and jumps and smacks that front beam, and that beam goes back and the whole thing rolls in at, say, 70 mile an hour, then I get a face full of water at that speed, and it breaks your neck, and then you're unconscious upside down in a boat that's and the ribs 45 seconds a minute back behind you. It just doesn't bear thinking about. And it's we didn't have, if you put a cockpit and harnesses and all that in there, then you're unconscious with harnesses and all that. Then you need oxygen, and then you got to you got all these different, you don't just do a little bit of safety. It's you go from being a motorbike to, I don't know, a drag car, where you got to, one thing is I want to get, and I've been unconscious upside down under this boat, and luckily I had a dry suit on that didn't puncture, that sort of got me out of the cockpit and stuff. And after that, it was a big scare. But yeah, it was pretty diabolical, and because the boat was going so becoming quicker every time I sat in it, and this massive record was within our grasp, and it was the end of the sponsorship and everything. Our sponsors' shares were at a record low on the day we got the record, and so it was just, it had to be done that day. The pressure was on, and I guess for me the happiest moment, or the most, I don't know, the greatest relief came when I actually got that thing on the trolleys and pulled it up on the lawn where we park it, and just sat it there out of the wind where I could hose it off, and there was no scratches and no one got injured, and we had that record, and then it was safe, it was and I hadn't broken my neck. And I'd said to people, even the night before, I sat there and thought, I knew what I had to do the next day, and I was thinking, should I sit and write a letter and just chuck it under the pillow here and just say, this is if this goes wrong, then I'm doing what I want to do, like this is it's a right way for it to go. It's a right way for it to go wrong, because I knew it could be big, and something big was going to happen on that day. And so to get away and survive with that, it's bloody scary living your dreams sometimes. It's everyone sits there and think you watch a band on stage, or actors, or athletes and stuff, and when it's showtime to do something different, you realize now that they're all just humans who have hopefully done their hard work and their practice and their training, and to go up there and do something exceptional is the first time you're given that opportunity. It's bloody terrifying. By the stage I'd got to this day, I was ready for that, though. We were ready to go in and knock this one out. And it was, I think on that video, another bit I show, I'm just sitting in the cockpit going over there, and I just look at the camera and put my hand up like that. It's just basically just saying, my heart rate's flat here. This is today's showtime, and one objective in this day. And those first 2 runs we did that didn't go well, I look back at them now, and I'm going into the beach fully stalled at 35 knots, where that little rudder is fully locked, and it's and the boat's not bearing away, and the only way I can normally with a rudder, as you know yourself, you just give it a quick shake of the tiller if it's ventilated, or a quick unload, and you hook it up. But with this one, I've got to turn that bloody lathe gearbox like that, which time the boat really turns into the beach and accelerates hard, and then I've got to bear it away really hard. And all the time, this beach is, 60, 70 meters away at 35 knots, and you turn it into this hard bear away, and it turned away too hard and lost the apparent breeze, so I had to ease the wing and blew the run. And we still hit 64 knots or something down the run, but it wasn't a good average. So I got to the end, parked the boat, and everyone come down. How was it? It's like, get the wing down, we're up again. Like, don't even think about it. And it wasn't until later on that I looked at that run and thought, bloody hell, that was a bold move not to abandon the run, to think I can shake this out and get it going. And it's I guess I was just confident in what we could do with the boat. But
one of the aspects that a lot of the sailors come up against is foil cavitation.
Yeah.
Now, Simon McKeon said it was an enormous issue with Yellow Pages, Endeavour and Macquarie. They always had to fight this barrier to get past cavitation. And I've heard the AC-72s talk about it, the AC-50s. What did you guys do to get past it? Because it just seems like to be this wall that makes it really hard to sail.
It was incredibly difficult, and it was it's very hard to know what's actually going on there. With two different boats, two different wings, about 7 different foils, we hit this same speed. We couldn't crack 53 knots. We did once with this boat. It's a really interesting thing because everyone was a theorist. No one had done it, and you can't test what we're trying to do very well in a flow tank, because it's all very well to get a tunnel that you can get a tube of water and you can reduce the pressure and you can put a foil in there. But the real world isn't like that, because we're dealing with a relatively short foil, 600 mil in our case, that's actually sticking into the water from the air and going through chop that's that big, or bigger. So it's when you got 600 mil going through, say, 25 centimeters of chop, the loading is going up and down, and it's not so much cavitation that was the massive issue for us. It was ventilation. I say that it's hard to know where, if it was ventilation, as we piled in more power, as we could do with this boat, because it had no righting moment limit because it was dynamically stable, then if it's just ventilation, then we should be able to keep moving up that speed graph. But everywhere we went, when we'd pile in more power, 53 knots, bang, it would stop. So it had to be cavitation of some form or another. Now, the water's not that clear down at Walvis Bay. Our foil is inclined inwards and under. You can't put cameras in the water. You can't look at it. You can see the amount of spray around it there. You can actually see a camera halfway along the fuselage there looking back at the foil. We had cameras everywhere. I even designed little torpedo cameras to look down the back. We just couldn't quite tell what was going on there. So whether the cavitation was happening or down at the very tip where you get those vortices normally spinning off, where you get a lot of low pressure there, and it wasn't quite making it to the surface, we don't 100% know. What we did with this boat, and this was a big part, leads back to an earlier question, is because we didn't have the answer to what the hydrodynamic solution would be, we said, we're going to build a boat that's the perfect test platform that can do repeatable runs as stable as possible, that we can plug and play foil solutions into. So the question to the design team was, how bad could a foil be that works at 65 knots? So they worked backwards from, if we had a flat plate of steel that was fully ventilated down one side, so you're effectively, instead of using the edge of a kite surfing board, you've got a high aspect ratio fin that's fully ventilated down one side. And they came back with a lift to drag ratio, I think it was somewhere just south of 4-to-1. So a 4-to-1 glider, that's a space shuttle, that's a brick. So we said, all right, now design the boat that in 26 knots of wind, can tow that 4-to-1, that worst case scenario at 65 knots. And that's the boat that we designed there. Then we had to go out and find this foil. So one of our first foils that we built, yeah, hang on, I've got a bit of it right here.
This is awesome.
Got 3 bits of it right here. So that's the section there. That's 2 halves with that pink stuff is a glue in the middle. So that's what it looks like. So you've got the front of it here. That's the leading edge, and that's the trailing edge there. And so it was designed to go along at a high angle of attack. And this side was supposed to be ventilated, so pulling air down from the surface, and it's effectively just planing vertically on this surface down under here. And we put this on the boat and we went sailing, and it went pretty well. We had a normal foil as well to test it against. And these aren't lollipop sticks. I mean, this is you know, high modulus autoclave carbon that you know, we got done even then at a cheap price, but it's still like 18,000 pounds a pop. So it's you want to get it right. But we went out with this, and the bloody thing went exactly as quick as the normal foil did. And you're thinking, you know, the tractor's towing along, but it wouldn't go much quicker. The one time it did go quicker, the only cavitation we ever saw on this was actually not on this surface where we thought it would be. It was actually on the leading edge here. And we worked out that pretty much the amount of camber in that bottom surface there was too much. It's like sailing on a windy day on your A-class or on your laser or anything like that, and you've got too much, you haven't pulled on the outhaul and the Cunningham. You're just driving, you end up driving off the leach. That camber was too much, and it was actually driving the foil slightly negative, and it was actually causing that little bit there to cavitate around the front there. And but the foil did hit one time. It hit a speed of 54 knots, which was our best speed at that time. So it's we dismissed that foil, said, all right, didn't do 60 knots, blah blah blah, and we went back to other theories. And then Malcolm is a very good engineer, sort of sat there in the background. Just one of our meetings just said, I don't think we quite understand exactly what happened with that our first shot at a cavitating or ventilating foil there. So we went back and had a look at it, and the hydrodynamicist we used at the time, when we showed him this foil, he said, no, that foil will only ever do 28 knots. It won't work. It's like, hang on, wait a minute, it did 50 knots. And then what? And he's saying, oh, it would have been a spike in the GPS. It's like, no, it did a 50 knot average down the course, numerous high 40s, and peaked at 54. And then we started to think, all right, well, if you don't think it, so what else aren't you seeing about what this concept could have done if the theory says that? And it basically comes down to this. Everyone thought that if that's your foil, that if that doesn't vent, everyone wants to build thin foils to go fast. I think thin foils are the solution. The trouble with thin foils is that the back surface here, the thinner you go, the air doesn't get from the surface all the way down the back. So this surface cavitates. Now, cavitation pressure is about 14 pounds per square inch. So the more area you have, the more drag you have directly on the back of the foil, and that's a killer. So of course you don't want to go thick. But what really happens is when you get to a certain level of thickness, air does get down the back and all that pressure is released. And it's exactly like, once again, if you're going to make an analogy with a dinghy or an A-class or something, it's like the release of the flow off the back of your boat. There's a time you don't get at the back of the boat because the water doesn't have enough energy, and you get all that gurgling at the back around the rudders, and it's just pure drag. But once you're going fast, you get that sweet release, and you don't get the drag effect of that water trying to grab in at the back there. So that was the case with us. The solution actually became to go for fat foils, and once we cracked that, then that solved all the structural issues, because we couldn't find anything to go. There wasn't a material that existed that could have enabled us to go as thin as the hydrodynamicists want and to go as and to give us the structural properties we need. But once we cracked it, was going to be fat. And I sort of read that on a very simple paper written by remote control powerboat guys who weren't so much into the maths, were into the fact that the guy in his shed had built 100 of them like Bert Munro and said, you know, no, don't go too thin. It won't do this if you do it like that. And I was just looking at it, and that's when we started exploring this other area of the graph up here, fat high-speed foils, and we ended up with these fat foils that that unlocked it. Then we went to Walvis Bay and went and put the new foil on that cost, I think it cost a lot of money at that stage, because we had to go through these design loops. Every time we designed a new foil, the designers would have to go at it. We'd have to run the numbers on it. That would cost, say, 15 grand in design time, and we'd come to a dead end, and we'd try another one, another 15 grand, dead end. And I'm sitting here for a year just, and we're just not, basically, we haven't got a solution for this. And that's when we went back and visited this old foil and found a solution, and went down there, put it on, went straight out there and went straight up to 52 knots and went out in 30 knots, 52 knots, 52 knots, 50. And it was like, I don't believe it. We're at this same rubbish number again. And it was only in those last few days where we put that little fence on the foil that you can see in the video, the little black thing halfway along the foil. And we just got the little bit of carbon that fit that size, said, try it there. That's about where the design ride height is, where it's going through the chop. And we put that out on and went for our first run, and did something like 55 point something knots. And it's like, hang on. Then did the next run, and it was like 59. And it was like, I think we've cracked it. And then after that, it was just world record, nautical mile world record, and then 65 knots, and then bang, put it away. That was it. So it happened that quick. It was pretty remarkable.
The fence. So the fence goes around the foil. So if you put that foil back up in the air again, it's going around it. Is that to help stop the flow going off the foil? Like, how does the fence work?
Well, at first we thought we were just going to operate. I mean, if you look at a kite surfer that's edging, it's only using the bottom surface of its foil, of the board itself, really, just to hook into the water. And it's very inefficient. It's a very low aspect sort of corner of a foil, just going against the water. So we said, well, let's build a nice long one. This was, I forget which way it goes. This was actually, a full foil that we've chopped in bits. But so let's make a nice high aspect planing surface, and that's going to be a lot more efficient than a kite surfer, but it will still work, because like a planing surface, hydrofoils lifting you out of the water will run into cavitation around 50 knots, but a planing surface, as we know, is good for hundreds of miles an hour, as Ken Warby has proven. But so we said, let's put that on a boat. Let's put a high aspect planing surface, and we'll make a super sharp leading edge. And that way the flow will trip off there very quickly. All this will be ventilated because the air will come down from the surface. But it's actually turned out to be quite difficult to get the flow to separate off at the tip down deep in the water. To get the air from the surface 600 mil down at 50 knots is very hard. So what was happening was this wasn't going through with just the undersurface wet and the top side ventilated. It was actually going across quite level with both sides wet and only the back side ventilated. So but what was happening was somewhere there was still some sort of cavitation that was causing this limit. So it's like the bottom of the foil down deep in the water wasn't getting air to it. To be honest, we still don't know exactly why. We just know that was the only logical conclusion we had. So with the next foil, we designed it where we wanted both sides to be wet. So you like a normal foil, you're still generating, you still got the water attached to both sides, but just ventilated down the back. But we figured that why it was still hitting 52 knots was because at high speed, this foil's very loaded, and maybe it was ventilating down half its length. And so that was still causing enough pressure at the tip to cause cavitation off the tip. So we said, all right, let's try and cut that ventilation off completely, which is what a fence does. A fence just stops air from sucking down the actual surface of the foil. Fence by name and nature just separates two things. But to think that that fence is going to work when it's going through the chop, you can see the chop in the picture there, you know, like to think it's going to make much of a difference when it's gulping that much air at it, or it's whether you call it air or sort of vapor or misty spray, you know, sort of certainly the grey area between wind and water. We didn't know, but we said, all right, let's try it. So we put that on there, and the first we put one on both sides, and we got to the end of that first run and went, that was a different boat. That was amazing. And we said, well, they work. And then we had a look at the foil, and the bottom one was gone. So we said, all right, well, that one worked. So we sanded the underside one off and left the top one on and did not change it. That was it for the next runs, and that did the job. So not in my wildest dreams did I think that would make that much of a difference. But it sort of validated our understanding of how the loading on the foil went. You know, we sort of don't have that physical proof apart from the number on the GPS, but it's I'd still love to understand what happened there. Once again, have a look at that video again for anyone watching this, and have a look on the footage from the camera looking down. You watch that spray change from a big fan of spray coming off the foil, and it hits this point where all of a sudden it streams clean, and that actually ties in with when that boat does that kick. So that's when it goes from ventilating down the upper surface of the foil to that going fast enough that fence cuts it off, and all of a sudden it goes from skidding through the water sideways ventilated to a touched flow on both sides, and then a
rocket ship.
Then she's a rocket. Yeah, she's launched. Yeah.
So, is there more to come from Sailrocket? Like you said, you got it, you packed it away, and you're only just really tip of the iceberg with what you were doing. You got your few runs, you got your record, and you packed it away, and it's been 8 years since. Like, you're going to get it out again?
It's hard to say, really. It's I'd like to think so. I always put it away, and it's stowed down there with the intent of going again. It's everything in it was built and maintained, and all the screws and bolts and pins and everything onto the titanium so they don't corrode. And it's you know, it's all.
So she's good to go.
She's good to go. We got it out a few speed weeks ago just to put on static display and just to get it out. Because no one had ever seen it really in the UK. It got built in East Cowes and then shipped straight to Namibia. And we put it up, and then we looked at it and we thought, well, we've only really got to attach that to that and that to that and that to that, and she's good to go again. And then we thought, well, there's no reason why we can't do a run in it. And it's the only thing that actually stopped us was insurance, and no one would insure it. So finally we got someone who said they'd insure it for, I think it was £1,000 a run. And so we said, all right, well, let's go. But then the weather crapped out. But that was that. So it just reminded us how the boat is in a fully sorted state down there. Now, that concept that we're talking about with having the flow attached on both sides, it enabled us to cheat cavitation, because we've effectively cut the foil off at its maximum thickness. So instead of having the foil come back and join together like a conventional foil, where all the problems exist, because as that water has to come from out here to join back here over that distance at 50 or 60 mile an hour or whatever, that's where all the pressure drop is so great that it leads to cavitation, and that's why we just chop the foil clean off there. If you imagine there's a piece of water here that sitting there having a good old time, and all of a sudden this comes along, and you've got to displace that water and get it to do work, and then leave it back here completely peaceful again in that distance. That's pretty hard. It's not that far different off saying you've got a car going along at 60 mile an hour and it's got to go around that corner. If you want it to go around at 70 mile an hour, and you've only got so much grip in your tires, the corner has to be longer. In the analogy with a foil, is this foil, in order for this to go faster, in order for that particle or that little car not to skid off, or that particle of water not to lose grip and cavitate, you've got to start making this foil longer chord. So you start stretching it out, and instead of being that big, it starts becoming that big. And every time you do that, you're adding surface area underwater, and this bit starts to become critical. There comes.
So
go on.
Go.
Well, that's a so in order to go faster with these foils under the concepts we got now, we can go faster, but we've got to put actually wider, larger chord foils down in the water, which start to become substantially draggier because we're trying to get things out of the water. So
yes,
and that means we end up sailing in 28 knots of wind, gusting 32, or 30 knots of wind, gusting 35, and then handling the wing, the chop in the water, the runway of flat water I've got to use becomes narrower and narrower. And but we think we can extrapolate that performance up into the 70s and stuff, which is good if you want to beat a record and stuff. That's obviously fantastic. But for us, the real challenge, the fascination of speed sailing is making technological breakthroughs. Not many people want to copy this design. Things like windsurfing and kite surfing, they're almost different disciplines. They're a little bit more athletic, and I absolutely take my hat off to those guys who go down those trenches and go blow for blow, and because the human is such a massive part of that whole equation and making that work. And it's but with the boats, it's more of a technological challenge to make concepts work. And the reason a lot of people don't come and want to buy your boat or copy your boat is because they want to have their shot at taking on that technological challenge and showing how clever they can be with the numbers and stuff. So for us, simply, if someone went and did 67 knots or something like that, then sure, we can extrapolate this and we can go down there and sit on that beach for another bunch of times and do a 70-knot run or something like that, which it'd be fascinating in its own right. But the real next challenge is designing the foils that really open up the box of tricks and get you up to over mid 70s and all the way through to hundreds and stuff. And that's really to deal with supercavitation. The trouble with supercavitation, which basically means that the whole foil. So you're working off the lower side of the foil here, but up here, instead of it being air at ambient pressure like what we're breathing at the moment, it is now air that's created because the pressure drop across the whole top of the foil is so much that the water is actually turned to vapor. So you've got your 14 psi of pressure, which is 10 tons a square meter. It's a lot. That's what we're feeling here, down on the surface of the Earth. This whole foil is operating in this gaseous bubble created by the drop of pressure. The thing, in order to get that pressure so low, the foil you're using at that speed is tiny, and it's probably, I don't know, it's probably not even that big, So you'd have that whole boat, going along at 75, 80 knots on a foil about that big. But the trouble is, that's great if you've got a submarine propeller or whatever. The hard thing about it is, what do you hold it underwater with? Because you're going through this chop, you've got this big vacuum that's just aching to get a gulp of air from above, at which case it's like running a full vacuum bag with no tacky tape or something, with just water as your seal. It's just trying to suck through that water and get to that bubble and rupture it and blow it out. And once again, if it blows out on this foil, that foil's holding you down to the water. So if that cavitation bubble ventilates, the boat goes into the air. So everyone looks at the numbers and goes, oh, supercavitation, I can get a lift to drag ratio of 12-1 when they're only running at 4-1. And you go, yeah, and they put out these numbers and say, we think we're going for 100 knots. And you go, yeah, good luck, because it's holding it underwater is bloody difficult. And really, even high-speed boat propellers aren't super cavitating. They're surface piercing. They grab a gulp of air every time they go round, and you know, it's a pretty tough nut to crack. But that's where we'd be headed with the next boat. And we don't have to change that boat. You mentioned earlier, is looking back, is there much I'd change? Not with this boat. This boat, and I don't even feel we need to build another boat. We'd refine it. We'd do the safety. We'd build the canopy for it. You know, even the GoPros themselves are a lot smaller now, but there's a number of aerodynamic refinements we'd do on it, and then details which would make us, you know, significant difference. But it's the boat itself is pretty good to go, and it's good for going a fair way up the speed range. I mean, the other teams have obviously dug through things we've said in the past. We didn't know how fast these new foils were going to be. We said a worst case scenario of somewhere below 4 to 1, but if that foil did 5 to 1, all of a sudden in 26 knots of wind, the boat would have been doing 75 knots. So you got to set structural limits, or you know, you got to have design briefs for all your figures and stuff to know how strong you're building this boat. It's a very well engineered piece of kit and very thorough. So we set a design limit of 80 knots because we didn't know how fast it was going to go. And designing above 80 knots means it starts to get unnecessarily bulky and heavy when actually 65 is plenty. So let's not get too excited, and but still 80 knots is in there. Interestingly,
so
go on.
What is the ceiling? What do you honestly think you could get on this boat?
I don't know. We'd still have to go and see how we get through super cavitation, or how well you do it. But once you're through it, really, I mean, there's some pretty crazy numbers there, and I don't like to say them until I know for sure. But if you can make that work, and once again, with these foils, half of it is it'll work great at 80 knots, but you've got to get over those humps to get there. It's really the next big challenge of speed sailing, to make those things work. And if you get those things working, well, you know, it didn't take them long to go from Mark 1 to Mark 2 once they cracked the sound barrier. Once they knew it was a done deal, it was often through. But, you know, getting teams with the passion and commitment to do it is the hard bit. I look back now and I realise how obsessed I was with the whole thing, and also how undistracted I was when I was doing this. I was incredibly fortunate to, you know, meet Helena and have someone who was such a great partner for the ride. So it wasn't totally selfish. It was something that we both did together, and we had a good team of people. But these can be long journeys, and it's I often wonder when I see teams full of very talented young engineers, or you know, people with a bunch of money who have a successful company, and I think, are you willing to sacrifice that and go and sit in these beaches and deal with all this stuff to keep that momentum going? Because I guess I was kind of dangerous because I didn't have all that. I was willing to sacrifice everything to do this, and yeah, they take a long time. Getting the right people together and having that, putting yourself in that corner where your only way out is to keep doubling down at the casinos, half the trick of it. So it's
So out of this video, all the Moths and A-class of the world are going to have big, thick, trailing edge foils? Well,
no, because you, as you know, you can go out there and on the one race course, you can have times you're sailing so many races are won at minimum takeoff speed. So you know, a lot of the time the secret is actually getting rid of those humps as much as possible, and having that smooth transition from being efficient in low riding mode to getting up and getting going, to being able to carry yourself through tacks and jibes, certainly in the Moth's case. One of the interesting aspects that we didn't check out was the first time I used the foil that's got the record now. I went out there and in that video, I said you can see that big rudders dragging in the water out the back there. At low speed, I've got a big, it's literally plywood sheathed in carbon, just a big brutal blade, almost like a centerboard off a fin or something like that, which just enables the boat to get going over that hump up to 15 knots. And then I kick it up and it wedges itself in the case. So I did that once, and I did a run, and the boat got going, and then it kicked up, and then for some reason I had to slow down. And once I've slowed down, I can't pull it down again. It's a one-way affair. I pull it up, and that's it. And I'm sitting there, and there wasn't that much wind. It was about 18 knots, and now I've got the smallest foil I've ever had on the boat, and it's just made for doing 65 knots. So it's not a normal low-speed foil. It's one of these wedge foils that I've been holding up. And I thought, nothing to do. The rib's just cruising along beside me at 6 knots, and I'm sort of just stuck in the water. And I thought, just for a laugh, I'll try and get going, you know, and there's nothing else to do. We'll probably go home after this run. And I played around with it, nooched it, and the thing hooked in and picked up and got going. And I'm going down the course, and I was actually looking over my shoulder, just double checking that is the foil we had on for the day, because it shouldn't have gone that. Everything, the theory and everything said that this should have the worst speed hump and need to be going with more wind to get going than anything else, because it's your tiny foil. And it hooked in and got going at low speed. And it did make me wonder, is there something else on those graphs that convention isn't telling us? Maybe they're not so bad at low speed. You know, it's if you look, I mean, and you go back to these AC-72s, and you got to remember there were big design houses, especially with Artemis and stuff, who swore that foiling wasn't going to be the way forward, you know, and black and blue. And when you actually get on these boats, you find they are. There's a lot you have to go out and actually try and see on the water and work out ways to trick them to go faster. And a classic thing, you know, we've been working with some soft wing sails on the A-class, and it's interesting seeing what the designers think and what the reality is when they say this is a standard wing sail, wing section mast and a sail, and this is an aircraft wing, and this is why it's so much more efficient. What they don't quite understand is the amount of hoops we can make a conventional rig jump through the evolution of the conventional A-class rig. You know, what that thing's doing when you're going around a course, you know, the way it flattens and twists and inverts and does all these funky things is, you know, they're not running that through their model. And so you turn up with your new sail, which should be a lot quicker, and it you know, it just gets absolutely spanked by a conventional rig. And you say, look, in theory it might work, but you've got to do a lot more things that your computer isn't telling you, because it's sometimes you just got to get out in the laboratory of the real world and play with this stuff. So that fat little foil did something that it shouldn't have done. It wasn't our job to work out what that was. We were dealing at the other end of the speed range. But, you know, the reason I'm telling you that story now is because I saw something funky there. And when something funky happens in the laboratory, it's usually sitting there going, look at me, look at me, look at me. You know, this is you'll remember this run. You know, that was interesting. So maybe.
So you finished the Sailrocket program, and then you decide to do something just as crazy, if not more crazy, is recreate the Shackleton voyage down to Antarctica. Like, you are a hellman.
That came out of the blue. I still don't know who put my name up for that one, but I was contacted to do it. At first, it clashed with Sailrocket, so I said I couldn't do it. And then I volunteered another friend who I did it with, Nick Bubb, and he was in there doing it. And the times moved around a bit. And I remember calling him up because he needed someone else because there's no skilled sailors on there. So they were looking for two, sailors, offshore sailors who could take on this challenge. I love the idea of it. I mean, the story's obviously legendary. I'd read the books and stuff, and it was, tantalizing, but I had Sailrocket and the record still to get. And so when I spoke to Nick to see, and we were talking about certain candidates, and he'd be good, give him a call, he can't do it. And I checked with him about the new schedule, and it was going to be just after Sailrocket finished. And I just said that out loud to him. I said, oh, we'll be done by then. And he just said, quick as a whip, well, why don't you come and do it then? And it was just, I was sitting there thinking about it as I was talking to him, and I was aware that I'm making up excuses in my head not to do it. Why am I making excuses not to do it? You know, I was just, I said, just leave me with it overnight. Let me think about that. And I just called him in the morning and said, yep. This is opportunity. This is. I sort of like to be the guy that recognises it when it comes along, and Antarctica and the whole Shackleton thing. He was now a man on the. I didn't know any of the guys involved, so he'd met them and seen them and said, yeah, I think they're pretty solid guys. So I signed on to that one, and it was. Yeah, I mean, the whole thing was like going down to Antarctica. It's like our space. It was such an amazing thing. But I mean, I was sitting there at times, you know, huddling in the bottom of this little boat, bobbing along in the Southern Ocean with bloody whales and penguins and bloody icebergs and stuff all around. And you're sitting there going, you know, one part in all this old wool and cotton clothing, and everything's authentic. You know, we don't have a head torch or anything like that, or a GPS or anything. It's just all done with candles and old compasses. And I was a navigator, so I've got the sextant around here somewhere. But, there it is over there. So I've got all this stuff. I was actually doing sextant sights down on the speed strip whilst I was waiting for wind to come up, just getting ready for this
practice.
And I'm sitting down in that, and you should be sitting there going, I can't believe I'm on Shackleton's boat sailing from Elephant Island, you know, and all the time I'm just sitting there going, 65 knots. I was just all the way across. We hiked across South Georgia, and every time I'd stop for a piss, I'd piss 65 knots into the snow. You know? It was just, I had this amazing 11 years of work that you sort of should have been back absorbing that, and then you were instead of having a chance to do that, you're just thrown into this other amazing adventure. And so to come back here, and on this very couch I'm sitting at now, I came back, and I think I probably finally had a shave and got this whole bloody southern growth off my face sort of thing. And I sat down on this couch in the morning, and I just sat here for a bit, and I said to Helena, I said, this feels like the first day I've ever had off in my life. There's no pressure anymore. I don't have to prove anything to anyone or myself. It's just, I just had this sense, and I've heard lots of people mention it before and since, and I get it 100% now, that the sensation I got after Sailrocket was just pure relief. It was just that it had worked, that all your effort, all that selfishness, all that sticking your head up and telling people to trust and back what you're doing, all that was justified. And it was, and with that Shackleton thing, I didn't want to just go and launch straight into the next thing. Two amazing things had just happened in your life, and I just wanted to absorb it and take stock, I suppose, because people want to know what's next. It was a fantastic run, obviously, but I sort of wanted to know what came naturally. If I waited till all the emails stopped and the phone stopped ringing and all that was done, what would naturally fill that space? I guess that's when, you know, you start making little drawings, and then you get out blocks of balsa and start carving up shapes again. And next thing you know, I got into the design of Sailrocket 3, because there's all these concepts and ideas that you'd put on the side whilst you're focusing on 65 knots. Things like that thing we were going to do with the foil that we didn't use because it wasn't right for then, that would actually work really well here, and this thing would work well there. And that fact that foil got going at that speed, maybe we should look down that path a bit more. And I don't think the future with Sailrocket 3, the idea was never to go faster. The idea was to take what we had learned and make it useful and more practical, and see if we can make a sailing boat that gives an experience that opens up an area of possibilities that no one's explored before, that is useful, that makes it a better boat. And if that is the end product, what we did there in speed sailing, then that's brilliant. That justifies it. I'd like to think that the speed sailing endeavours, validated our ability to take a crazy idea and show that you can turn it into reality, that you can make all the compromises necessary to nurse these things through, where you actually deliver that crazy and you make it work. So, because that really is what you're showcasing, I suppose.
So other than the crazy Sailrocket, which is just phenomenal, you've sailed some amazing boats. The Team Phillips catamaran that had the 2 masts that I loved as a young boy. I thought it was a phenomenal boat, and unfortunately it broke up. Did it make it to the start of the race?
No, we were on our way down to the start. There was really bad weather that time of the year. It was in December, as it usually is, bad weather, and we had to get from Dartmouth down through Gibraltar and to the start in Barcelona, and it was just constant low pressure systems coming across. Up here in the north, that means that it's going around counterclockwise. So what we decided, one after the other, because we were supposed to have done a Jules Verne by then, and when we first launched the boat, that's when we had the problems, and the bow broke off, and there were structural issues that needed going over. I guess it was it just, by the time, it didn't have enough money at the start to do things, and I suppose, so you take people and sponsors and stuff on board to fill the gaps in the budgets that you don't have, and it puts you in that position where you don't have much leverage. You've got to take what you're given, and I think that led to not enough resource going into the design and testing of it, and certain people not quite delivering on what they should have done. And so by the time the money did come along, the cancer was already in there. So that was really unfortunate, because Pete had really laid out a budget and got the momentum going, or a timeline where we should have had enough time to debug that boat. But it turns out the bugs were monsters. So we lost all that time, and then we had a problem. I mean, we had some really frustrating little problems that, once again, they weren't the problem with the concept. They were little supplier problems. One company that supplied all the titanium, they had a guy in there who was laid off but had to work for 2 more weeks, so he just sent out random batches to everyone and didn't care what spec it was. So all of a sudden, all the titanium bits started failing, and it's, instead of being this grade of titanium, it was that grade, and so you've got to go and read annoying shit like that. Anyway, so in the end, it forced us to sit there, and Pete made a bold call and said, for our training, we're going to go round England, Britain and Ireland, and we're just going to ride around the outside of this low pressure system in December, and come out somewhere in the Atlantic where we got more sea room, and come into Gibraltar, and that's going to be qualifying and everything. If anything goes wrong, we'll pull in, pull in somewhere around England and fix it, and off we go. And we just got in this scenario where one of the Volvo engines didn't got a hydraulic lock in it, and the boat didn't motor very well, if at all, under one engine. It was so wide, and they're only small engines, that it wouldn't sort of get. It would just sort of be the one-legged duck myth, just bring it around. So we got stuck out there in sloppy seas, and not much wind, and we couldn't motor out of it to get to where the wind was going. And it was terrible for 2 freestanding rigs and all that stuff to be out there just slopping around in this sea state. It was literally ripping main sheet blocks off and stuff. It was a horrible day, and we had to wait for the next low pressure system to come across. So by this time, we're out in the Atlantic, North Atlantic, and the next one comes, and we start going around that, and then the whole Atlantic just shut down. And the next one that was coming, there was no question we didn't want to be there. We're getting closer to Iceland than Ireland, and we have to go down and possibly start going upwind through this big sea state to get down and through this. And we'd hardly been, even things like going upwind with this rig in any sea state we'd never done. And so it got pretty diabolical pretty quick. And the actual failure, it was definitely bad enough to create a problem, and it was a sign of a degree of flex that we weren't counting on. But it wasn't catastrophic. But it was enough to say, we're a wounded duck now. And that sea state and that storm and that scenario was, I've been around the world twice since in the Southern Ocean and numerous times, and I've never seen anything like what that North Atlantic dished out. That was, it's like you've lived in the hills of Australia and, you go to Nepal. It's like that. It's like, that's a mountain, that was incredible. And the boat rode it out pretty good, but it's, as a platform, as a big raft to survive that, it was pretty good. But stepping off that boat was incredibly, that was a sad moment. And it had a big effect on me, and certainly in the way I went forward with Sailrocket, to see this prototype not make it through to where it was given a chance to show what its strengths, to see how people criticize it without actually quite knowing the reasons of why it didn't get through, and to see that from the inside, set me up quite well for Sailrocket. And I thought, when it becomes my chance to do my project, so many of these great ideas don't make it through to the end, and for all these various reasons. So I knew that, these were going to be the cats I had to herd to get this Sailrocket through, because everyone, they look at something wacky like Sailrocket, and even Team Phillips, if you like, and that people expect them to fail. And I wanted to come out with a beacon at the end of this that says, no, if you do it right, these ideas can and do work. And, even to this day, I still live with the regret of that Team Phillips didn't get a chance to, to live and take people out on it and show it the many amazing aspects and the incredible engineering that went behind that project. And God, the passion for that boat, and down there in the West Country, and that was just phenomenal. I mean, I came out of Australia looking for a ride, and within months you're sitting there meeting the Queen, and standing on this boat. Things happened pretty fast around that time of the year. It was a pretty exciting time. And yeah.
So you've been on Team Phillips, you've been on Hydropter, you've been on the Mod Sevi of Concise, Super Yachts. Have you got a favourite over the years that you've done all these amazing boats? Other than Sailrocket, because Sailrocket's way up there.
I love the C class. That they've all been fun. I mean, the Mod 70, they're probably one of the greatest boats, multi-hulls, that's been built. They are just so tough. They never fail to deliver. Thrills, finish lines, records, results. You bring them in, you hose them off, and you go to the bar, and they're just amazing boats. So I think those things really deliver. I love the fact that for my own thrills, that I can sail on all these, or fortunately get the opportunity to sail on all of these boats, and I still love to go and get on an A class. And when I did that Worlds in Weymouth, sure, it was in the backyard and that there, but there are times I finish some of those races, and you get across the finish line, and it's been so close with the other boats, and the crosses, and every mark rounding is huge, and the upwind foiling and all that, and you get to the end, and it's just, I just got a grin from ear to ear, and I think, God, that has got so many aspects of what I love about sailing in it. The competition, the closeness, the sense of flying, the interaction of wind and water, the response, and everything, I absolutely love about it. No, look, it's all brilliant. It never stops, ceases to amaze me, wind and water. Super yachts. I mean, just recently I did the first ever slow trip. Slow trip was a delivery on a 115-foot super yacht back from the Caribbean, the lovely Sejana. And it was almost the first time where you haven't had to get the boat there. You're not racing. You're not in a hurry. There's chefs, there's showers, there's, air conditioning, there's move. And all of a sudden it was like, this isn't a stress. This is a lovely place to be out here. I couldn't care less when we get in. We got work out of the day, and I thought, yeah, I get this cruising. You see whales. slow down and have a look at the whales, not race past them and try and avoid them. Because a lot of the sailing, the offshore stuff it's brilliant, but it's bloody stressful because you're on the edge all the time. What's that cloud going to do? What's that mean? Am I going fast enough? Are we gaining or losing and stuff? But I'm looking forward to, I suppose I wanted to do as much of that as I could so I don't look back with any regrets. So when the cruising time comes, you'll be ready for it. And I'm saving the cruising. The South Pacific's there to be done. There's so much stuff I'd like to do. And, certainly that Shackleton thing in Antarctica, that opened your eyes. I mean, that takes, it takes a lot of skill and experience to navigate some of those tricky areas down there, and no one's coming to get you if you get it wrong. So, that's a different skill set in its own right, and it takes you to these just mind-blowing places. So there's still a lot to be done. Yeah.
So currently you're, that's how we know each other, ACATs, and we've sailed a few worlds against each other, and you're out here for the Nationals just gone down here at Paynesville, which was great. But you're also working with Pip Hare on her a mocha campaign for the upcoming Vendée Globe.
Yeah.
That's got to be pretty exciting because some of the newer mockers just look phenomenal. I mean, I know she's got an older boat, but gearing up for possibly an even more up there campaign for the future one. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, I hadn't met Pip up until, I don't know, whatever it was, a year ago when Nick, who I did the Shackleton thing with, he couldn't do the Fastnet, which was a double-handed race, and he said, can you take my spot in there? So I went down and met her, and I knew the boat from when it was new back in 2000, and I joked to her saying, I remember back in 2000, this used to have like an ankle windlass that you'd put a rope around. That's how you used to cant the keel. And she's looked at me and go, yeah, same ankle winch. It's still there, and it's so I went and had a look, and I'd heard of Pip, but I'd never really followed closely. Our sailing orbits never really crossed. And I was checking her out, what she'd done, and realized that she had this huge backlog of experience, and that she was a very experienced sea person. And so when I went down to see her, I thought she needs someone. She's got an older generation boat. She's got no money, and I know what no money means. It doesn't mean you've got 20 grand floating around that you're trying to save. It means you've got no money. And what she doesn't need is people who wish her well and this, that, and the other. She needs a good, solid hand. And I suppose I drew on my experience in Sailrocket when people had come along and really understood your problem and said, what you need is 5 grand in your bank on Monday. And, they don't mess around, and you appreciate it when you're hungry. And it's so I went down. I thought, provided she's not a nutcase, it's I think I'll do this. It's obviously you make a living out of sailing, but there's some areas of sailing of professional sailing that you like to give back to, in respect to the help you've been given. So I saw her, and we got on well. And I said to her then and there, right, let's do this Fastnet. So we went out and did it, and they're all the old sails. I'd already done the last Vendée Globe, and we went out there and we lined up against all the boats, all the Shirelles and all the new boats and the Peavers and stuff like that. And from the start of the race, I was saying to her off cows, we're right, we're going to from the start of this race, we're racing like on that start line. There's no reason, we're not giving way to them, we're not doing anything, we're going to hit this running. So we get into this race mode, and everything on that boat is heavy, and the friction in the winches and the systems and the halyards and everything was tired, and it was just hard work, and it was a big boat because the new boats, the sails are lighter, the masts are a bit shorter because they're foilers and everything. Everything's a bit easier, but this boat's just plain heavy. So we went out, had a great start, and we came out the Solent and had to make a quick decision. Couldn't quite make it out past the Needles, so to dive off to the North Channel, and she's sort of navigating on a phone at this stage, but there's a few boats ahead of us, so at least we could follow them. One of them ran aground, so we don't go that way, we go over this way. And we dived off, and we ran deep down the coast. And all the foilers, they've all got asymmetric sails. Everything's on furlers, like they're tight luff headsails. Everything's on furlers because they're high apparent wind foiling boats. So they all go off at higher angles, but they're off, they're gone. And we've got, big loose luffed kites and stuff. So our thing's deep VMG, 145 true wind angles. So you monstrous kite, big mast, put this thing up, and we just run off and start separating deeper off down the coast towards Portland. And we're looking there, and the wind's still there. And the bigger boats, Scallywag and Rambler, started behind us, and they came. Everyone else was heading out in the channel, and these guys came down inside us, holding the same angles. And we thought, well, it can't be too bad if their navigators are down. They were starting to get aware that we're the only boat out here on the right, and there's this big hole out in the channel. And the VMG and the logic of our course just says, provided the wind doesn't crap out, we're on the straightest course here. And we just kept creeping through. And then Scallywag and Rambler took off, and all the navigators, they all got this herd mentality where they all took off out over there. It's like they didn't want to be the only one out over there because they'd look silly if they didn't follow the group consensus. And I think you see this quite a lot, all the way up in Volvos and everything, Figaros and stuff. And so we had no other option. So we stayed down there, and Pip came down. I'm just concentrating on trim, and later in the day she comes back and goes, oh, Scallywag's jive back in. And it was like, oh yeah, well, thinking they'll be 5-8 miles ahead or something now. And I said, oh, where are they coming in? She goes, oh no, they're back there. It's like they're behind us again, like they should have gone through us like a dose of salts. And she said, yeah, we're actually she said, you're going to like this, we're actually leading. And it's like, so we kept going, and I didn't get too excited because I thought, we're going to pay our tax here. They're in a hole, we're going to hit the hole, and it looks great, but let's just keep going. And all through the night we just kept going, 3 knots of wind, but we had tide apparent into Falmouth, and we kept getting lifted up towards Land's End. And I was looking at our tack out of there going, this is going to be horrendous, we're going to get murdered as soon as we tack. And we just got lifted and lifted and lifted and made it around Land's End, and we were in first place coming into the Sillies. So you had all the latest state-of-the-art mockers out behind you on this old boat. And it was just surreal. And we were leading on this old boat coming into the Sillies. But when they came through, holy smokes! I mean, I had to do the old, like the old comedy, and just sit there and go, am I sure that's not a mod or a trimaran? Because that thing is, A, the bow's about 6-7 foot out of the water, and B, it's going about twice our speed, and it's and they just came flying through us, quite often with no one on decks, just flying around, foiling, and off they went. And annoyingly, every boat we saw from then on was going past us because we were punching well above our weight. But that was great. So somehow through all this lockdown madness, Pip managed to pull completely out of the blue a fantastic title sponsor in Medallia, and then she's gone from the problem of not having a sponsor to not having a lot of time. So we're trying to make the most of that budget to get the most we can out of the project, with the consideration that it's an older generation boat. So
still on the same boat?
Still on the same boat. No time to change it there. She's qualified on that boat. It's a very reliable boat. That boat's, got a long history of delivering finish lines. So there's a few other boats of the same generation. Interestingly for her, she's got this, it's a fantastic challenge in that the not that we really like doing women's records, because there shouldn't really be a reason why there's much difference in this racing. It's and the woman who proves that there should be no difference in this is the one that holds the record for the Vendée Globe, which is Ellen MacArthur. So I think she got around, I'd have to double check this, I think it was 94 days or whatever it was. It was I think it was 94 days. And she did it in Kingfisher, which was the same generation as Pip's boat. So there's this fantastic target she's got there, because you don't want to just do the Vendée and cruise around, and say, I did the Vendée. You want to race. It's a race, and the level's high, and you're out there to test yourself. And almost the last thing you want is a nice, easy lap of the planet. We're here to see people struggle and see them deal with adversity and overcome and this massive workload and keep this focus on the big picture of the finish line, and that's her challenge. So, you know, she'll be aiming for that Ellen MacArthur benchmark. I'm sure, you know, provided the foilers make it around, Sam Davies and Isabel and these other sailors should go around this quicker. But she's got a race and she's got a target, and if she can get anywhere near Ellen MacArthur's, I'd be pretty proud of that on that boat. I'd be bloody proud of that. Yeah. So I don't know. Look, it's so, after that Fastnet, it is just relentless workload. It's going to be a lot of work for her. So yeah, she's got. I tell her she's got one job, Pip. She's got to put she's got to put a tear in our eye when she gets to that finish line in Le Sable d'Olonne, because I've seen her down there struggling, the only one sanding the bottom of a boat, just not knowing how she's going to pay the bill the next day, literally Googling bankruptcy. And, you know, and probably one of the best things I could do was just offer her that encouragement and saying, this is what it feels like when you're following your own passion, and it's bloody hard, and it's, you know, it's why everyone doesn't do it. It's in a movie, you know, it's all taken care of in a montage or a small clip or something like that. In reality, it lasts a long time, and you got to live with it, that doubt and that anxiety, and the only thing that drags you through is that belief that there's something there at the end of it, and that you can do it, and you don't let it overwhelm you, and she's made it through that, and she's going to make it to the start line. And then you know, the emotion we all feel at the end is because we've those of us who followed her for a while have been on that journey, and we've ridden that roller coaster. So, and that's what this is only a frivolous sport at the end of the day, and you try and use it to make examples, to learn a bit about yourself in more finite terms instead of in the vague ways you can learn about things in other day-to-day activities in life. And you try and showcase good ethics and standards and passion and self-belief, and do it in a black and white manner where the results showcased at the end. And it's you take people along for that journey. And that, I look back at Sailrocket, and it was a massive journey, and that was the whiteboard which I started, that was kind of blank, and that I learned so much about myself and life and the world, and it was fascinating, and I like to think that everyone on that journey enjoyed it, and it made the world a little bit richer, and they could take a little bit of something away from it. And I think Pip's story is certainly going to be that. And the Vendée is a beautiful race for that, because there's obviously there's the race at the front, but so many of the greatest stories of the Vendée Globe have happened further back in the fleet. So it's a fascinating and brilliant race to watch. So we'll see how this one goes.
My last question, and I ask this question to all the guests that I get to come on this, is what advice would you give yourself looking back, a younger you? Now that you've done all the things that you've done, what would you say? Like, hey, Paul, younger Paul, do this. Make sure you look out for that.
Look, I'd leave it in younger Paul's hands, because it's right now, the advice. When I have young people coming up to me and they do ask me advice and what do they think, you look at them and you think, if you're not ready for this, it's like telling someone to get into a boxing ring or something like that. It's like, unless you really want to get into that boxing ring, don't do it. Like, if there's no other way, if that's how you're going to define yourself, and go and do it, because it is hard, and there's so many unknowns. Like, I know what happened now. I know who I met along the way. I know what opportunities come, but back then you didn't know it. And just that, I understand now as I get older why it's a bit more of a young man's game, because you're desperate to prove to yourself and to others who you are, and you've got the people whose boots you want to walk in and be amongst. And it's for some people that's just the gravity of that is just too immense, and they just can't live with themselves unless they give it that full 100% go. And it's no, I look at some of the risky things and choices I made, and how gleefully I grabbed them when I recognised them and followed them. And that was leaving Australia. I was up in beautiful Hamilton Island with a fantastic job with fantastic people, and I had to walk away from that when I had that one invite to a wedding in Europe where I might meet someone to get me on a faster boat. And you know, that you did that. I'm happy, perfectly happy with how it went. I love the opportunities I've had. Forever grateful. I always had. I appreciate that I could smell the roses along the way. That I recognise that this is extraordinary opportunity, and it's something to be savoured, and it was never lost on me. And I came up. There's the other thing that is pure luck, that you came up through an era where this opportunity was given to you. You know, when all those maxi cats were there through the trimaran era. You know, with Ormers and you know, later these boats were available. C-class cats, you know, like when they came back together, I was in the right place and time to get involved in those programs. The Shackleton thing, I mean, they're all opportunities that came along, and you know, I just think I made the right decision to take them. It's never obvious. Sometimes these decisions are never obvious, and I guess the one bit of advice I'd give anyone is you never know who you're talking to, or you never know when your actions are going to do you good or harm. So don't make a prick of yourself ever to anyone, and don't burn your bridges. It's a long picture. It's a long game you're playing, and so often I've been helped by people who you did a small kindness to, or took the time out to talk to, or, you know, and later on, it doesn't always come back straight away, but later on, that guy who you didn't talk to that much because he was an accountant and you didn't think he had much to offer because he's not sailing that fast or whatever, and then you turn out and you realise that, you know, when you did help him rig up his boat or whatever, later on, he's an accountant for that company. Oh, he can introduce you. You never know. And I don't actively do that. It's just, you might notice I like to talk, but that's you know, that's always helped me out. So you never know who you're talking to, and how other people might come along and have make a profound difference to your life. So yeah, be respectful.
I don't think that's a good advice for just people in sailing. I think that's a good advice for everyone these days, that, you know, kindness is something that we all should have a lot more of. So, look, Paul, I really appreciate you coming on board. It's been a real pleasure. Yeah, thank you very much.